Step out of the car, now. She didn't flinch, didn't argue, didn't panic, because Jessica Carter had been trained for moments like this. Just not on her own street, not in her own city, not on a night that was supposed to end with leftovers and silence. Red and blue lights pulsed behind her, reflected off the windshield like warning shots. She turned off the engine, dome light on, hands visible, resting at 10 and 2. Not out of guilt, out of muscle memory. The officer moved fast, white, mid-40s, flashlight already in her face before the first word left his mouth. License and registration. Jess handed them over, calm, controlled. "May I ask what this is about, officer?" "You match a suspect, black female, dark sedan. Step out." A second cruiser pulled in, then a third. More lights, more footsteps, more assumptions. They didn't ask. They didn't explain. They acted. The door opened without warning. Hands grabbed her, firm, impersonal. They pulled her out, patted her down, tossed her belongings onto the street. Her lunch container flipped open. A folder of classified documents skidded across the pavement. Then, a framed photo of her father, cracked beneath a boot. Jess stood still, because silence is sometimes smarter than defense. Then came the moment. Found something. A plastic bag, white powder. "That's not mine," she said. Even. Measured. They didn't care. The cuff snapped shut. Cold. Tight. Familiar. "You have the right to remain silent." It wasn't a warning. It was a script. As they pushed her into the back seat, one officer muttered, "Should have just kept your mouth shut." Jess didn't answer. She didn't need to, because what they didn't know was that Jessica Carter wasn't just another black woman behind the wheel. She was federal intelligence, level 7, division 13, and the people who had just arrested her, they had no idea what kind of case they'd just stepped into. Have you ever been looked at like a problem before you said a single word? Not because of what you did, not because of how you acted, but because of what you looked like. The second you walked in, Jessica Carter knows that feeling. And maybe you do too. Maybe it was in a job interview, when your name made them pause. Maybe it was at the airport, when you were randomly selected again. Or maybe it was just walking through a store, feeling eyes that didn't blink, following you, step by step. You weren't doing anything wrong, but somehow, that didn't matter. That's what Jess lived with. Every single day. Even with degrees. Even with clearance. Even with credentials most people couldn't imagine. She still had to prove herself, like room by room, interaction by interaction. Because some people, they don't care who you are. They care what they see. Your skin, your posture, your silence, your confidence, and when you dare to carry yourself with calm strength, when you speak clearly, move smartly, hold your ground, that's seen as a threat. Jess didn't fight that. She studied it. She learned how to walk through fire without making smoke. She made her silence strategic, her posture intentional. But silence doesn't mean surrender. That's what people don't realize. And that night, when she was stopped, dragged out and framed, it wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who's ever been told, "You don't belong here. You don't look like you fit. You should stay quiet." But Jess, she'd spent her whole life preparing for that exact moment. And the ones who tried to silence her, they had no idea. She was about to make the whole room listen. Jessica Carter grew up on the quiet side of loud streets. where sirens replaced lullabies, where keep your head down wasn't advice, it was code, where her mother didn't just raise her, she fortified her. Denise Carter worked night shifts at the hospital and day shifts cleaning office floors. She never missed a payment. She never missed a promise. And she never let Jess forget. No one will protect you like you protect yourself. Her father? Gone too soon. A heart attack. Ignored at an ER because no one believed a black man in pain. Jess was 8, and that night, she stopped being a child. She started watching. People. Voices. Rooms. Why did some get listened to faster? Why did others have to repeat themselves just to be heard once? She didn't complain. She calculated. By middle school, she wasn't loud. She was sharp. She didn't raise her hand to speak. She raised it when it mattered. In high school, she dominated debate tournaments, wrote essays that made teachers rethink their rubrics, led with clarity, and still got labeled intense. She wanted to be a civil rights attorney, until she discovered something quieter and more dangerous: intelligence. Not just being smart, but gathering truth in silence, reading patterns, tracking power. Jess majored in international relations at Howard, then cryptography, then behavioral psychology. She didn't chase a job. She was recruited. Division 13. Clearance level 7. Training that didn't show up on transcripts. Assignments that don't get listed in resumes. She learned how to disappear without leaving. Jess became the kind of operative that left no trail, no noise, just impact. She could read a lie before it left the lips. Disarm tension in a room by shifting her stance. Disappear into a role, and no one would see her coming. But for all her mastery, she couldn't hide one thing: her face, her skin, her presence. Even in briefing rooms, she'd get asked, "Are you with catering?" Even in federal buildings, guards double-checked her badge more than others. She never yelled. She never put them in their place. She stored it. She let them talk. She let them underestimate. She let them teach her exactly how the system protects itself. Because Jess wasn't just collecting credentials. She was collecting leverage. So when she drove home that night, quiet street, steady heartbeat, classified documents in her back seat, she wasn't caught off guard. She was ready. Jess didn't move through the world loudly. She moved with precision. Not because she was shy, but because she'd learned what happened when people like her spoke too soon. There's a kind of survival that doesn't get statues. No headlines, no applause. The kind where you don't yell, not because you're weak, but because you know the room stops listening at the first sign of volume. Jess lived that. She walked into rooms that clapped for her resume, but flinched at her presence. Rooms where her calm was called cold. Where her intelligence had to be wrapped in a smile, or risk being labeled aggressive. She measured everything: the pitch of her voice, the length of her pause, how many times she nodded before making a point. It wasn't performance, it was protection. Even within federal buildings, she could feel the difference. The looks, the extra ID checks, the way someone always asked, "Who are you here with?" She knew the rules. Be excellent, but never intimidating. Be confident, but never too confident. Be smart, but humble enough that no one feels threatened. So Jess played the game, and she played it well. She let junior agents interrupt her, just so the meeting would move forward. She let her ideas get recycled, as long as the mission succeeded. She never complained, never corrected, never cracked. But inside, She was keeping score, not of people, of patterns. Every insult phrased as a compliment. Every smile that didn't reach the eyes. Every space where she had to shrink to be allowed in. Jess didn't burn bridges. She mapped them. She knew who had power, who thought they did, and who would fall apart the moment they were questioned. And even with all that, she knew it wouldn't be enough. One day, someone with a badge, a grudge, and a bad assumption would try to reduce her to a stereotype. She didn't live in fear of that moment. She trained for it. Not just physically, not just mentally, strategically. Because people like Jess, they don't get second chances. They only get one shot. To be silent long enough for the truth to speak louder than them. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Jess drove like she always did. No rush, no distraction, just her, the road, and a mind never truly at rest. Then, the lights. Red and blue. Flashing in the rear view like a threat that didn't need words. No siren. Just the message. Pull over. She didn't panic. She moved the way she'd trained. Engine off. Dome light on. Both hands visible. Not guilty. Just aware. The first officer approached. Fast. White. Mid-40s. Flashlight already blinding her before he spoke. License and registration. Jess didn't flinch. She handed them over, calm. May I ask what this is about, officer? You match a suspect. Black woman. Dark sedan. Possible drugs. Her eyes didn't move. Her breath didn't change. Another cruiser arrived. Then another. 3 officers. 3 flashlights. 3 minds already made up. No questions. No conversation. Just action. Her door opened. Step out of the vehicle. She stepped out. Slow. Deliberate. Hands out. Posture neutral. Heart steady. They patted her down. Opened her trunk. Tossed her belongings onto the street like trash. Her phone cracked on the concrete. Her folders scattered. A framed photo of her father, broken beneath a boot. She didn't yell, didn't protest. She observed. Then, one voice. Found something. A plastic bag, white powder, lifted high like a trophy. Jess looked at it. That's not mine. They didn't care. The cuffs went on, tight, cold, final. You have the right to remain silent. It wasn't a warning, it was choreography. They shoved her into the cruiser like she was a threat, like they'd caught someone dangerous. And all the while, Jess stayed quiet because she wasn't confused. She was calculating. In that back seat, she replayed every second. The angles, the timing, the body language, the evidence. It wasn't a traffic stop. It was a setup. And what they didn't know? Jess wasn't just someone driving home. She was an active operative, embedded in a quiet investigation. For months, she'd been tracking departments with suspicious patterns, stops without cause, evidence that appeared too conveniently, body cams that malfunctioned at the wrong time. This department? Already under review. Her being pulled over? Not random, not surprising. But now, it was personal, and it was perfect. Because what she didn't have was first-hand experience. Until now, they had just handed her everything she needed. The abuse, the planting, the chain of command failure, the audio, the dash cam. They'd turned her investigation into a living case study. And Jess, she would use it all. Not with anger, not with noise, with precision. As the cruiser pulled away, she leaned her head back. Not defeated, not afraid, just focused. Let them think they've won, she whispered to herself. Let them write the report. I'll write the ending. The cell was cold, not freezing, but cold enough to remind you, you weren't in control anymore. 4 walls, a bench, one flickering light that buzzed like it hated silence. Jess sat, back straight, eyes focused, hands resting. No pacing, no muttering, no breakdown. Just silence. Because silence is where she operates best. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was recording. Every second since the stop, every phrase, every movement. The way the flashlight hit her eyes, the order in which they searched her car, the boot on her photo, the timing of the discovery. She replayed it like footage in her mind, frame by frame, not for emotion, for evidence. The officers thought she was just sitting there, defeated, waiting. But Jess? She was building a statement, a case, a consequence. This wasn't the first time someone like her had been cuffed unfairly. But it might be the first time. They did it to the wrong woman. She closed her eyes, not to rest, but to focus deeper. They think I'm cornered. They think I'm helpless. Let them. Because Jess didn't need to shout. She just needed a courtroom. And time. The courtroom didn't look like justice. It looked like paperwork. Coffee breath. Tired suits and tired assumptions. Jess sat still, flanked by a public defender who barely looked up from his folder. 3 officers in the back, now in pressed suits, not uniforms. Sweating under fluorescent lights, the judge called the room to order. Jessica Carter, she said, monotone. You've been charged with felony drug possession and obstruction. Do you understand these charges? I do, Your Honor, Jess answered. Then, she paused. 1 second, 2. Before we proceed, I respectfully request that this court contact Director Mason at Langley, Central Intelligence. The room paused with her. The prosecutor blinked, smirked. Your Honor, the defendant seems to be... Clearance level 7, Jess continued. Division 13. My arrest has triggered a federal breach protocol. The room froze. The judge stared. You're claiming to be a federal operative? Jess nodded. Calm. I'm not claiming. I am. The bailiff stepped out. Returned minutes later with a sealed envelope, marked eyes only. The judge opened it. Read. Then read it again. And her voice changed. All charges against Ms. Carter are dismissed immediately. The room cracked open with whispers. The prosecutor stammered, Your Honor, we have body cam footage. And this court, the judge cut in, has confirmation of Ms. Carter's federal status and protected assignment. This arrest is now classified under interagency review. The 3 officers? Stone. One clenched his jaw. Another looked down. The third reached for a pen with a shaking hand. Jess. She stood, picked up her bag, and walked out like she'd simply finished a meeting. No cameras, no applause, just a door, closing behind her. But this wasn't the end, because the truth was bigger than one arrest. Jess hadn't just been going home that night, she was on assignment, investigating unlawful traffic stops, falsified evidence, and a pattern of abuse. And this department was already on her radar. They didn't just frame the wrong person. They completed her case. Her report, already drafted, was updated within hours. Dashcam footage, time-stamped body cam files, chain of custody failures. Undeniable. Unstoppable. By week's end, all 3 officers were under internal review. 1 resigned, 1 lawyered up, 1 retired early. Jess didn't name them publicly, didn't grant interviews, didn't chase justice in headlines. She filed her report. Quietly. Thoroughly. Because for her, this wasn't about revenge. It was about record, about precedent, about what comes next. Jess didn't throw a press conference, didn't post a thread, didn't say their names. She didn't have to, because the system already knew. Within weeks, 3 internal investigations were launched. 1 officer resigned. Another failed a review board. The 3rd stopped showing up altogether. But Jess wasn't watching them. She was building something else. 3 months later, she filed paperwork to establish a private initiative. SPEA, K Strategic Protection, Equity, and Knowledge. No branding, no buzzwords, just purpose. She trained young professionals, especially Black women, on how to navigate power, how to document abuse, how to de-escalate without disappearing. She partnered with quiet allies inside law enforcement, built bridges with lawyers, analysts, policymakers. She turned her arrest into curriculum. She didn't want attention. She wanted impact. The officers? Forgotten. The mission? Focused. SPEA grew quietly into an intelligence-informed system for legal protection. No screaming, no protests, just readiness. She gave others what no one gave her: tools, tactics, time. And she did it all without once raising her voice, because real change doesn't always come from rage. Sometimes it comes from remembering everything and choosing what to do with it. You don't have to fight loud to hit hard. And Jess? She hit with precision. Have you ever been mistaken for someone you're not? Talked down to, even when you were the most qualified person in the room? Ever stayed quiet? Not because you had nothing to say, but because saying it might cost you too much? Then maybe you understand Jess. Maybe you felt it. In a classroom, in a boardroom, in a line at the store. That quiet pressure to shrink, to soften, to disappear. Just enough to stay safe. Jess lived that. So do many of us. And she didn't beat it by shouting louder. She beat it by being ready, by turning every dismissal into data, every doubt into design. She didn't rise in anger. She rose in silence, brick by brick, moment by moment. So when the world finally challenged her, she didn't react. She responded. You don't have to be loud to be unforgettable. You just have to know who you are when no one else does. So now, let's ask the question back. Have you ever turned silence into strength? What would it look like if you did? Not every war is loud. Not every victory looks like winning. And not every hero leaves a trail. Jessica Carter didn't need headlines. She didn't need applause. She needed results. And she got them, without ever raising her voice. Because sometimes power isn't in how loud you speak. It's in how clearly you stand. She turned silence into strategy, pain into preparation, and injustice into infrastructure. Now the question isn't about her anymore. It's about you. Have you ever been overlooked, misunderstood, told to calm down when you were already composed? Then maybe your silence wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the beginning of your next move. power doesn't always raise its voice. Sometimes it whispers, and the whole room still listens. So now, we're listening to you. Drop your thoughts. Share your voice. Send this to someone who moves in silence, but thinks like a storm.